Today is Thursday, October 1, 2009. This is the start of an interview with Mr. Brian Bobek at the RSVP offices of Catholic Social Services of Macomb, located at 15945 Canal Road, Clinton Township, Michigan. Mr. Bobek is 64 years old. He was born February the 7th, 1945. Mr. Bobek resides at 21180 Armada Ridge Road, Armada, Michigan. My name is Dave Brousseau, and I will be the interviewer, and Paul Wilhelm will be the videographer. Mr. Bobek, will you state for the record the branch of service that you served?
I was in the United States Army in the Corps of Engineers from 1966 until 1968.
Let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you were born, where you grew up, went to school, and then how you ended up in this branch of the service?
I was born in Highland Park, Michigan. My parents at that time lived in Ferndale, Michigan, so most of my life I grew up in Ferndale. I moved to Southfield when I was a teenager, finished junior high school and high school in Southfield, graduated from Southfield High School in 1963, and subsequently got married about 1965, and I was drafted in 1966 into the military. At that time, I had taken a job as a design draftsman with an engineering firm, because I had a good technical background. So I was working as a draftsman, design draftsman, at the time I was drafted into the military in '66.
Did you give any thought to what branch of service you would prefer to go in, or?
No. Of course, in those days we had the draft, and I think as a young man we realized that unless you had something, a deferment of some type or something medically wrong, you were probably going to be conscripted into military service. But I thought about enlisting at one time. I went down and I thought about joining the Navy, and they said, well, with your engineering background, he said, we could take you into the Seabees and put you in probably in an advanced rank going in the door, but your chances were 80% sure you're going to go to Vietnam. I said, well, that didn't sound like a heck of a good deal to me. So I said, I'm going to go home and wait for the draft. So I waited for the draft, and sure enough, the Army came knocking. When I went in, of course, they put you through some interrogation procedures and ask you what you'd like to do. And I told them at the time, I said I would like to be in the military police, and for my duty station, I would like to have Alaska. And I had heard once that if you were in the military police, you want to get in the canine corps, working with the dogs, because the dogs can only work 4 hours a day. And I thought, that sounded like a pretty good deal to me. But so they listened to all that and made all the notes they wanted, and then they put me in the Corps of Engineers and sent me to Vietnam. So I think they just asked you what you wanted to do and where you wanted to be stationed to make you feel good, knowing full well that if you were a young, healthy guy, you were probably going to Vietnam in those days.
What was the feeling about the war or the Vietnam?
Well, I think at the time that I went in, the anti-war sentiment probably was not at a peak yet. I mean, we were young guys, I mean, everybody I went in with was 19, 20. I was probably one of the older fellows to go in the service. I was 21 when I went in. I don't really recall a lot of the political thing, and frankly, we didn't get caught up in it. The country asked us to go and serve the nation, and I think, like most young men in those days, that's what we did. Didn't get caught up in the politics of it. We had access to some information when I was in Vietnam, newsreels and things. We knew there was some of that starting up back home, but we really didn't get caught up in it. That wasn't our thing. I think it really became more prevalent later on, going into the 70s, and the anti-war movements and things that were going on. But from my standpoint, I didn't see any of that anti-war sentiment in the areas that I was involved in.
At the time you were drafted, were you married?
Yes, I was.
Okay, so you weren't living at home.
No, no.
Do you recall the first days of the service?
I went to the induction station was in Royal Oak. We reported down to Royal Oak, and they loaded us on a bus, took us down to Fort Wayne, down in downtown Detroit, loaded us on a train, and that day they shipped us off to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and that was basically an overnighter. And then the next day I left Fort Knox by bus, I believe it was, and we went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which is where I took my basic training.
How long was your basic training?
8 weeks.
Was there any rumors circulating as to where that was eventually going to end up for you?
No, basic training is pretty much the same for every soldier or person that goes in the military. You go through 8 weeks of basic training, and the intent of basic training is essentially to teach you to be a combat soldier, because regardless of what they call MOS is, once you get a permanent station, military occupational specialty, regardless of what that is, whether it's engineers, artillery, armor, secondarily, everybody is a fighting man. So they teach you hand-to-hand combat, how to shoot rifles, throw grenades, all the type of things that a combat soldier would be required to do.
Is this a really different life from beforehand?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, your closest encounter was, watching old John Wayne movies and things on TV about the war, and how glamorous it was. But you get in there, and I don't begrudge my experience. I mean, I think it taught me a lot, and it helped me to grow up and say that there are things in life you don't have control over, but you still have to deal with them and get on with your life and do things you don't normally want to do. And so I think personally it was a great experience for me.
Any particular activities that you can remember
In
the boot training?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of them. It focused a lot on physical training. So I mean, they pushed you to the limits of your endurance, and a lot of physical training, and obviously following orders. A lot of military drill, the manual of arms, and learning how to handle weapons. But the thing I probably remember the most is there's a lot of running.
Any particular instructors that you recall?
Oh yeah, everybody. Well, you had a platoon sergeant that was kind of your drill instructor, and then there was a Puerto Rican fellow that was kind of the head drill instructor, I think, and he was kind of a live wire. He was a difficult one to deal with. Actually, my guys were pretty decent, but they kept you in line. They made you know that you were at the bottom end of the food chain, so to speak. But I remember them. I don't remember them real well, but I know that there was a lot of focus on discipline and training and that type of thing.
What was your next step now once you completed boot?
After the 8 weeks of basic training, I went home on a short leave. I think probably, I want to say maybe 2 weeks. And then from there I reported back to Fort Leonard Wood again for what they call AIT, which is Advanced Individual Training. And that's where I got assigned to the Corps of Engineers and got into my engineer training. So it's fairly generic at that point. You do a lot of different things because you don't exactly know what kind of a company you're going to join when you end up with your permanent duty station. So they teach you, how to build bridges, how to tie ropes and knots, how to set off, C4 explosives, and you shoot bazookas, and you shoot grenade launchers and machine guns, and all the types of things that you're going to be required, could possibly be required to do as part of your permanent duty station, even though you haven't found out yet what you're really going to do. So that was another 8 weeks of AIT at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
So there must then have been a decision made as to what you were going to do and go into additional training for that?
Well, following AIT, I was then moved to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The company I was assigned to, the Army made the decision on where you were going to go, of course, so I got assigned to a company called the 573rd Engineers, which was a float bridge company. They had returned from duty in the Dominican Republic shortly before I joined them, and I got assigned to them at Fort Bragg. That would have been probably August or September maybe of 1966, and the Army made the decision that was the company I was going to go with, and so that's who I joined in Fort Bragg. Then the emphasis became more on the technical aspects of building float bridges, which was their area of expertise. And a float bridge is basically a series of like big rubber balloons, I guess, for pontoons, for lack of a better term, that you blow up and then you put in the river and then you lay a steel decking across it so that you know, trucks and tanks and things can drive across the river. So that I spent from the fall of '66 until the spring of '67 at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, basically going through my technical training for building of float bridges.
At this point, how many opportunities did you have to go back home?
You had leave. We basically worked 5 days a week, and you had your weekends free, but you weren't allowed to go too far off base. And then once in a while you get like a 3-day pass, and you were still only supposed to go 300 miles off the base. But you know, obviously all of us snuck home, and my dad would send me a plane ticket, and I'd fly from Fort Bragg, North Carolina to Detroit. And I remember one time going back, I was flying back to the base, and we had to go through Knoxville, Tennessee. And which really, if you look at a map, Knoxville, Tennessee to where our station was in North Carolina, it isn't all that far. But the airport was fogged in, and they couldn't get us out of there on a plane into back to North Carolina. So I said, well, I'm going to cash my plane ticket in. I'm going to get a bus because it's not that far. Well, yeah, it's not that far, but you know, it's a milk run, and that bus took like 12 hours to get back to Fort Bragg. And of course, I was late. I missed morning formation, and you know, at that point, you could be considered AWOL, but I was chastised for it. I got some extra duty for missing morning formation, but I think because I was probably a pretty, what they call strack in those days, I was a troop that really didn't give anybody any bad times. They chose not to take any kind of other enforcement on me other than make me pick up some extra cigarette butts or something.
So you did get a chance to get back with family?
Yeah, I think,
fairly frequently.
well, not frequently. I think I probably made 2 trips home the 6 months or so that I was at Fort Bragg. It probably wasn't even 6 months, but I probably got 2 chances to come home.
Were you now in a position you felt comfortable with that you would like to work at? Or did you just get thrown into something you really didn't like?
It wasn't I didn't like it. I mean, it wasn't where you had a choice. That's where the Army picked you to go, so that's what you did. But, I mean, as things go, as opposed to being in the infantry, I guess it was probably pretty good duty.
What was the next trigger of where you were going to go from here?
Well, as I said, the 573rd had returned from the Dominican Republic, and it wasn't too long after I think that I joined them that we were put on orders to go to Vietnam. And I don't know at that point if we really knew the specific date, but we knew inevitably we were going to be going. So come along about March of 1967 now, the company did deploy from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and we loaded our equipment up actually in Columbia, South Carolina, and the ships took our trucks and bridge materials and things the long way through the Panama Canal. But the company as a whole, they flew us from Fort Bragg, North Carolina to Oakland, California. And once in Oakland, California, they loaded us on board of a troop ship, and I took a ship to Vietnam. It took 21 days to get from Oakland, California to Vietnam. We spent 18 days out of Oakland. We landed in Subic Bay in the Philippines. We basically spent overnight in Subic Bay, and then next day we boarded back up on the ship and we went on to Vietnam. We landed, we ported at a place called Quy Nhon first, just to offload some troops and supplies, and then we continued down the coast to a town called Vung Tau. So the 21 days on board a ship, I mean, this was no Royal Caribbean cruise, I can tell you. It was probably 3,500 soldiers on a ship, and out of Oakland it's notoriously rough, and I've never seen that many sick guys in my life. Myself included. I fared fairly well. I only got a minor case of upset stomach, shall we say, but there were guys on the ship that were sick the whole 21 days. It's unbelievable. The only good factor I can say is when you deploy by ship like that, your time counts from the moment you leave Oakland, California. So by the time I hit the shores of Vietnam, I already had 21 days of my 1-year assignment over there in. So that was not bad either. It worked out pretty well.
So that, I imagine scuttlebutt was rampant as you're going through your last station in North Carolina, was it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To the time you finally arrived in Vietnam, about what you'd be doing, what was going on in the war, what was your...
Well, I think in some respects it was better for me than a lot of guys because we deployed as a whole company. So the 250 guys or how many people were in my company, you're going over with a lot of your friends. A lot of the folks I know that went over, the lot of young guys, jumped on a plane, a commercial flight, and flew over there and got off a plane in Vietnam, not knowing a soul. And I mean, that would have to be absolutely terrifying. But I still remember kind of a funny incident because when we got to Vung Tau, they took us off the ship and they loaded us onto what they call an LCU, which is just basically those ships like you saw, those little boats that you saw in the Second World War when they invaded Normandy, where they, the front folds down, and we're on this LCU going into shore, and I'm thinking, my God, we're going to get to shore and the front of this boat's going to go down, the machine guns are going to open up and they're going to be chopping us down like, like fodder. Well, obviously that didn't happen, and it was a port that was under American control. We didn't have any issues getting off that LCU at all. But those are the kind of thoughts that go through your mind. You think back to the World War II movies when they hit Normandy and Omaha Beach, and I thought, man, I don't want to be mowed down by some Viet Cong machine gun as I get off this boat. But then we got to shore, and we were supposed to get on an airplane to fly up to where our base was, and of course there was no plane. And so we sat out on that runway, I think, for probably 2 to 3 hours in the hot sun, waiting for a plane to arrive to take us to our permanent station. And it was one of those C-130s where they have the upswept tail, and the back of it drops down, and you load up, you walk up the ramp and get into the back of the airplane. And there were so many of us, you didn't sit down. You basically got on this airplane, you put your duffel bag in front of you, and you scrunched up against your duffel bag, and the guy behind you put his duffel bag against your rear end and scrunched up against it. So they loaded us all in the C-130, and this thing took off with us all standing up in it. So there was no way to fall down, obviously, because there was nowhere to go. But we flew, and luckily it was only about, I think, a 20 or 30 minute flight into Bien Hoa, which was the air base near the base that I ended up getting assigned to. So there was some interesting times arriving in country, but I said I think the thing that made it good for me is I went over with all my friends. I wasn't over there as a loner getting off an airplane in a strange land.
How far into the DMZ were you?
No, we were a long way from the DMZ. The DMZ was up what they call I Corps, 1 Corps. That was the farther northernmost regions, and you had 2 Corps. I was in 3 Corps, so my duty station was about probably 20 miles north and east of Saigon. So I was down the country fairly well, and in a fairly large military establishment called Long Binh. And it was, I don't know how many acres it comprised, but it was a large military establishment.
So you were quite a ways from the action at that point.
Well, there was action everywhere, but certainly not the the DMZ type of activity where the Marines and the Army were up there engaged in battles on a daily basis, and the bombers were coming in and dropping bombs. I mean, there were no safe zones. South of us was the Mekong Delta, and certainly a lot of things happened in the Mekong Delta too. So there was no safe zones over there. You were under threat continually.
So after the aircraft landed, you were at your station, and what went on then?
We got trucked over to Long Binh, and there was no, as a new company coming over there was no established area set up for us. So there were tents. We stayed in tents when we got there. They were on raised wooden platforms. We had big squad tents set up. And that's where we started living, and while we were there, of course, we started constructing the more permanent, what they call hooches, which was the bunk areas where you slept. So we built aluminum buildings, we built a mess hall to kind of settle in and get out of the tents and at least get under a little bit better cover. A lot of that, we were right on the perimeter of Long Binh Post itself, and we had a lot of guard duty we pulled out there along the, the perimeter, and some interesting times out there at various times. So, but the first focus was on getting our camp built so we had a decent place to live.
What was your assignment then as you began to get settled in?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the 573rd was a float bridge company, and our duty was to be put on call to build float bridges if and when required, which frankly, all the training we did in the States, I never built a float bridge the whole time I was there, the first 6 months. We hauled a lot of bridge. Typically, somebody else had the grunt duty to put it together. We were kind of considered technical advisors, which isn't bad. It's a little bit lighter duty than we turn it over to the combat engineers or to the Vietnamese to build a lot of our bridges with our technical assistance. But when we weren't doing bridge assignments, we did an awful lot of trucking. There was a lot of things to move around, and construction equipment. And so it was a rare day when you were on the base. We were on the move all the time, moving somewhere within that 3 Corps area of operation.
Any additional training take place while you were there?
No. I think you're pretty much trained for your specialty prior to going over there, and then it's just a matter of,
Gathering the
following through with
experience
assignments.
at this point on, eh?
Yeah, I mean, it's learning how to operate in a different kind of environment. Obviously was a lot different going from North Carolina to South Vietnam. So learning how to live in the hot temperatures and the humidity, and the monsoon season, the dry season. I mean, it was an interesting time.
On a relative basis, then, you were pretty much settling into a normal routine?
In the early days, I'd say yes, that was the case. We were building our base, and obviously we had to go out on the road, which can be harrowing experiences at times. Anytime you're off that base, you're certainly subject to ambush and many other things too. So there was a lot of, I can't say trauma as an infantry guy would have probably seen it, but there was always that veiled threat that anything could happen at any time.
Any experiences you recall?
Yeah, but that happened about halfway through my tour. They transferred me to another company, which was a panel bridge company, different type of bridge, and we did come under fire. There were times when we'd build bridges. I remember one particular example. We went down toward the Mekong Delta and built some bridges, and as we're pulling away, and we got half an hour down the road, and maybe not even a half an hour, you hear the explosions, and you look in your rearview mirror, and the bridge you just built is being blown up already. So you think you're doing a good thing that the Vietnamese people would even appreciate having a bridge, but the Viet Cong had a different impression of things. So there was always that threat of stuff, who's hiding in the bushes waiting for you.
Were you okay with what you were doing? Was it just a job? Did you enjoy it? Did you really not like it?
Well, I didn't dislike it. I mean, I guess if I'd had my druthers, I'd have rather not been there. But again, I mean, it's a situation you put yourself into a mindset. This is my job. Anything you do after a while that's repetitive, gets to be boring. But there was enough breakup in it. As I say, we weren't building bridges all the time. In fact, as I said to the 573rd, I never built a bridge the 6 months I was with that company. But you were on the move constantly. A lot of that even got repetitious after a while because you tended to convoy through the same areas a lot.
Mm-hmm. What kind of entertainment activities did you have?
Well, we had an enlisted men's club, or you obviously when you were off duty at the end of the day, or if you didn't have duty a particular day, you could go to the EM club, which was the only air-conditioned building that we had over there. And there was 3.2 beer that the guys consumed a fair amount of. You could go to the PX on the base, and we did have, occasionally we would get entertainers that would come in. Most of those tended to be Korean groups, and would come in and entertain us. They'd set up a little stage and some chairs, and the guys would come over and watch the Korean groups try to sing American songs. That was always kind of interesting.
Never had a chance to see Bob Hope?
Yes, I did.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I saw.
Can you tell us about that?
Bob Hope came in Christmas of 1967, and in fact, I remember it was kind of interesting. There was a midnight mass service, so we said, well, let's go over to it was in a big amphitheater there on our base. I said, let's go to midnight mass, and then after the mass breaks up, we'll just stay at the amphitheater and get good seats for the Bob Hope show the next day. Well, that wasn't exactly the Army plan. So the mass ended, and it's like, you know, you guys got to go. You can't stay here. So they kicked us out of the amphitheater. So I remember there was a helicopter landing pad, so I just laid down on the helicopter landing pad, and I slept there on this piece of asphalt all night long. And I thought, well, that way we'll get up early in the morning, and we'll still be the first guys at the gate to get back in. Well, that didn't work either, because they didn't open it up until 10 o'clock in the morning, maybe. And then we rushed in and got the prime seats, and then we were kicked out of there because those were the seats for all the wounded GIs and things that were coming in from the Army hospitals, and of course General Westmoreland and his staff and all that type of thing. So they kicked us out of there into the cheap seats. So I was a fair amount away from the stage by the time Bob Hope got there, but he brought quite an entourage of people. I remember Raquel Welch in particular, because she was probably the first American gal we'd seen since we'd been there, and it was very entertaining. And I really always appreciated what Bob Hope did for the soldiers over the years. I mean, he went out of his way every Christmas to take his time to go over there and entertain troops all over the world. I truly respected him for that. But it was a great show, and we got to see him and the girls and laugh for a while, and then was back to duty as usual.
Anybody else other than the girls that was in his group?
I don't remember the guys.
Right. Did you make any friends?
Oh yeah. You have, like everything else, our company probably had 250 people in it, but you have a handful of guys that you tend to associate with and run with. And ironically enough, I mean, after I was in two different companies over there, but after the war broke up, it was like we really lost track of each other. And here just 2 years ago, I finally went to a reunion, an engineering reunion in Rockford, Illinois, and I thought, well, maybe I'll run into some of these guys over there. Well, I was the only guy from the company there. And I left that a little bit disillusioned, and I thought, I know these guys are out there somewhere, and I'm going to make it my job to go find them. So for the last 2 years now, I've been tracking down guys from my old company, and I found, probably 62 guys from that company. I found also a dozen, unfortunately, that have passed away, but it's an exhausting process, and I've enjoyed it. They were surprised to know that after 40 years, somebody was actually still looking for them out there, so most of them were very receptive to it. Some of them were through some pretty traumatic times. Not all of them came through it as unscathed as myself. But it was nice to reconnect with some of my old buddies. I haven't seen them personally, but there's going to be another reunion next year. In fact, it's going to be at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri next July 2010. And what I want to do is get as many guys from the 60 some odd guys I have found to try to join that reunion, and at least get a chance to meet up with our old buddies. So
Did they sound receptive to that idea?
some do. Some physically, it's apparent from talking with them they're not going to be able to do that. But probably the few guys that I considered my closest friends are certainly looking forward to it.
Any of these that you contacted with emotional problems connected with the war?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, emotional problems, physical problems. One guy, one of our lieutenants, got part of his leg blown off, and other guys, you can tell in talking with them that they're not all there. So, and that's unfortunately just one of the side effects to being in a combat zone and being exposed to the kind of things we were exposed to, along with the Agent Orange exposure and things like that are taking its toll. I mean, the Vietnam vets are dying at a rate of 300 to some guys a day, and I'm involved with the Vietnam Veterans of America, and I get a newsletter every month. It's amazing to see the number of guys that are dying and the ages they're dying at. It's seldom you see a guy dying from Vietnam that's over 65. They're mostly 58, 62, 64. Occasionally you find a 70-year-old in there, and that's rare. So the things that they didn't tell us are starting to take their toll on us now in our golden years.
So you're finding a lot of, well, you're finding some things in which you didn't know at the time.
Absolutely not. No, I mean, nobody back in those days, I mean, one of the things I think I've come to understand better is we didn't get caught up in the politics of it, and you do get exposed to the lies of the war. And we just weren't smart enough to know the difference. Now, 40 years later, you look back and you realize all the stuff that we were told, and that was was not true. And Agent Orange, and, all the toxic defoliants they were spraying, and telling everybody, well, there was no issue with those. Well, 40 years later, we're finding out that there certainly was.
And you say you were there how long, a year?
I was there, well, minus my 21 days that I spent on the ship. Yeah, it was a 1-year tour of duty.
So they kept to that, eh? It's one of the non-lies.
Well, it's strange. I mentioned earlier, about halfway through my tour, they transferred me from the 573rd to the 617th Engineering Company, which was a panel bridge company, a different type of bridge. And that's where I finished up my tour of duty. I was due to rotate home at the end of February of 1968. And, I mean, relatively speaking, I look back at my time there as saying I really had 11 months of pretty, I'll say peaceful time as opposed to being in a combat environment. But in the end of January 1968, the 68 Tet Offensive broke out. And I can remember that my replacement was already there because I was due to go home in a month. I was what they call a short timer. I'm ready to go home in a month. So I had turned in my steel pot, I turned in my flak vest, I turned in my rifle, because I was basically supposed to be assigned to light duty on the base and not be put back out on the road. So I'm there, and the night that the Tet Offensive started by us, it was quite a traumatic time. The ammo dump blew up and caved the windows in of our hooches, and we didn't know what was going to happen. And I remember I thought all I had on was a pair of underpants and my shower shoes. And I thought, I'm in a heck of a fix now. I don't even have a rifle anymore. So I ran to the armory. The machine guns were kept in the armory. So I ran down to the armory and I grabbed an M60 machine gun. And I remember I went out by the perimeter and I got all set up and got this machine gun. I'm all hunkered down behind these sandbags, and I thought, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be going home. You don't belong out here. So you react before you really think. And as it turned out, nothing happened at our point on the base anyway. They did infiltrate other places, but they didn't come through where we were at. So it kind of passed without incident. But I was down to my last 30 days, and then they came on the Armed Forces radio and said, anybody that's in country can figure on being extended at least, I'm not sure if they said 3 weeks or 3 months. And I thought, well, this is a heck of a fix. I'm ready to go home, and now you decide you're going to keep me here another undetermined amount of time. I wasn't real happy. But as it turns out, I was able to get out right on time. And in those days, if you came home from overseas, from Vietnam, and you had 90 days or less service left to do, your actual rotation date, your discharge date, they gave you an automatic drop. So my orders were cut for 89 days early discharge, and I told the orderly in the CQ room, I says, don't you dare send me home a day or two early. I said, you stick to my orders because I want that 89-day drop. So when I came back from Vietnam, I went through my processing out at Oakland, California, and I was immediately discharged and went home. So I didn't have to serve up until May of '68, which would have really been my final discharge date.
Were you aware at that time what the attitudes were back here in the States regarding the war?
We were hearing some of it. When I came home, they flew us by commercial jetliner from Benoit Air Base near me, back into Oakland, California. And I got off the plane in Oakland, and we went to a processing station, and we spent the next 24 hours or whatever it was there at the processing station getting drubbed out of the service. Got our final pay and our Class A uniforms. Then we went to the commercial airport there in, I don't know, it was Oakland or San Francisco, one or the other. and caught a plane back to Detroit. I didn't notice anything like some of my friends noticed. I mean, you heard a lot of talk in those days about guys being spit on and things thrown at them, and I didn't encounter that. But what I did discover when I came home and I went back to work, and guys would say, "Well, gee, where have you been? I haven't seen you in 2 years." I said, "Well, I've been in the service. I've been in Vietnam," and it's just like a lull came over the conversation, and they didn't want to engage with you. They just kind of like turned around and went back to work and went about their lives. It's like, at the time, it probably didn't register till I thought about it later, but it's just like nobody really wanted to talk to you about it. So that was probably the only thing that I really noticed. Other people I know that came back met with a lot harsher fate than what I did.
Did you have any service medals that you'd like to tell us about?
Well, the highest commendation I received is what they call an Army Commendation Medal. In pecking order, it's probably 5th or 6th from the top. Obviously, you start at the Congressional Medal of Honor, and you go down through. It's not even issued for necessarily extreme bravery or heroism, but we came under fire one time. We had a truck breakdown between a town called Swan Lock and a place called Black Horse, and we knew it was an area that was infested with Viet Cong, and our truck broke down. So I commandeered a couple of other trucks to stop and set up a perimeter guard around these guys while they were trying to fix this tire or whatever it was that happened to the truck. And we came under fire, and it seemed like it lasted a long time, but in actuality it was probably only a matter of 10 minutes. I don't really know, but luckily the 11th Armored Cavalry was in the region, and they kind of come over and saved our bacon. But it really was out of my realm of responsibility to do what I did, to commandeer the other vehicles and set up the perimeter guard, and for that they gave me this commendation medal. But beyond that, I think it's pretty much the typical ribbons that everybody else got. You got your good conduct and your national defense ribbon and service and campaign ribbons and that type of thing. So,
isn't there a ribbon that you get for being in a war zone for a certain period of time?
Well, the Vietnam service ribbon itself shows that you served, in Vietnam, certainly during that era, and were an in-country veteran. So there were 2 ribbons, the Vietnam Service Ribbon and the Vietnam Campaign Ribbon, that were given to everybody that served in country. I mean, virtually everybody got a Good Conduct Medal unless you were out of line. Everybody got a National Defense Medal. Anybody who was there got the two Vietnam ribbons. So anything beyond that is based on some kind of individual achievement or recognition.
How did you stay in touch with family while you were there?
Letter. That was,
did you say letter
by
or letters?
Well, letters. I mean, we had mail call, but back in those days, there was a facility on our base called the Mars Station, M-A-R-S, and I don't know what Mars, military, blah blah blah, something or others. And the idea was you went to this Mars Station, and there was a telephone there, and you got connected with a ham radio operator somewhere in the world, and hopefully between Vietnam and the United States. And the ham radio operator they would raise, then he was supposed to call your parents and then patch you through so you could, or parents or loved ones back home, and he was supposed to patch you through and have this two-way communication going on between you and whoever you're trying to talk to. Well, I tried it a couple times. I could never get through. It just never worked. So it fell back to letters. So obviously I kept in touch with the people back home via letter, and care packages from home with chocolate chip cookies and all that, the usual kind of thing that we had. Today it's a little different situation, laptops and cell phones, and frankly I'm not sure which is better. I don't know if we were better off and less homesick by being over there out of touch than what it is to be able to get on there and talk to your wife or your parents every single day on the laptop. I have no basis to equate the two, but it seemed to me it would make me a whole lot more homesick to be in that kind of environment than just basically being over there with your buddies and knowing essentially you weren't going to have any contact for at least a year.
When you sent the letters home, were there anything unique in the letters, particularly the envelope?
Well, we didn't have to put stamps on them, they were shipped.
What did you
shipped
put
free.
on them?
Just APO, whatever our APO address was over there, it was the old, airmail envelopes with the red and blue checkered stuff around the perimeter of the envelope, but you weren't required to stamp it. That was one of the benefits of being, in a war zone, that you write a letter and put an envelope and send it, and it went through postage free. The only thing you had to be careful of is what you talked about in the letters, because if it fell into the wrong hands, or there was a case you talked about some operation that was going to be coming up, or there's always a chance something could fall in the wrong hands, so you had to always be very discreet about what you put in the letters.
So were they all reviewed before going out?
No, not that I know of. I don't think so. I think basically you seal it, and I trust that the mail system was discreet. I think it's just a matter that if something happened to a mail truck, or the Viet Cong got a hold of a mail truck, and you said next Tuesday we're going on this mission to such and such, there's always a chance for a breach of security.
Some letters coming home had a picture of a stamp that the sender would draw a stamp on it and then just put free in the middle of it. Do you ever see those?
Well, that's over
I
40 some
suppose,
years
yeah.
ago. If I did, I guess I don't remember that, but.
I was really taken back when I saw that, and I wondered if that was more of a practice or somebody's unique individuality coming
It
out.
may have been, now that you mention it, I sort of think I do remember at times writing free on the envelope, but I didn't go so far as to draw a picture of a stamp, but I remember anyway.
What about leave while you were there? Were there places you could go to get away?
Every soldier was entitled to a 1 week out of country, what they call R&R, rest and relaxation leave. I was signed up to go to Hong Kong, and for whatever reason I chose not to go, so I never left the country while I was there. I can't tell you why.
So there's no other places you could go while you were there?
Well, there was an in-country, they had in-country R&R also, a 3-day in-country R&R, which was back down in Vung Tau where we landed, because that was a fairly secured area. I didn't take the 3-day R&R in Vung Tau either. I just didn't see the purpose to that. But you could go to Australia, you could go to Hawaii. If you were married, you could go to Hawaii and meet your wife. You could go to Hong Kong. There was probably a half dozen places that if you took out-of-country R&R that you could have gone to. And I said, maybe because I couldn't find anybody to go with me, or my buddies didn't want to go, or whatever, I didn't take an R&R out of the country. I was there my whole time.
How are those kind of trips financed?
Out of your pocket.
So there's nothing that the service provided?
I think they provided a flight, but I think obviously your out-of-pocket expenses were your own obligation, but I think they did arrange to get you where you were going, because you were entitled to that. But you didn't get compensated for it if you didn't take it.
So what was it like the first couple of weeks, month after you got home? I imagine there had to be some winding down you went through to...
Yeah, obviously you want to get back home and see your friends, and I had a car at the time when I went in the service. My dad kept that for me while I was gone, so I got back home and jumped in my car and I ran around to see all my buddies and renew all my acquaintances. I don't exactly know when it was I went back to work. It might have been like a month or so after I returned from Vietnam before I finally went back to work, because you had reemployability rates. But just getting caught back up with everybody, and probably a little bit of partying went down as I know of a couple parties for sure, but I don't recall an awful lot of it. But I was anxious to get back on with my life and get moving and get back to my job and make some money.
At that time, you were able to come back and assume your position at where you worked.
Correct.
There wasn't any problem with that?
No. The federal law, I think, guarantees that if you were drafted out of a position, that they have to have a position for you when you came back.
And what was that position when you got back?
I was a design draftsman for an engineering company. So,
Now, after all you've been through, was that as rewarding as it was when you went in?
Is what is
The
rewarding.
job?
Well, that was my profession. I mean, my family, I have a long history of automotive engineers in my family, and had the industry pretty well blanketed, and I guess it was just one of those deals like, if the father's a doctor, he expects his son to be a doctor, and my dad was in the engineering business, and my brothers were in the engineering business, so I think it was kind of predestined that that's what I was chosen to do, and I think I was good at it, and of course, certainly throughout the span of my career, it was a lucrative way to make a living, and I did all right in that field.
So your temporary move into the service didn't change your views of what your career path was?
No.
Did you get any photographs or any kind of memorabilia that you saved from your experience?
Yes, yeah, a lot of photographs. I mean, one of the things that most soldiers did when they got over there was go to the PX and buy a camera, because the deals on them were so good. And of course, in those days, it was all 35 millimeter SLR cameras. So I bought one while I was there. I took just a box camera over with me, and then I bought another camera when I had enough money. And I took a lot of, not photographs, I took a lot of slides in those days. And everybody was shooting slides, and then of course I found out when I got home how expensive it was to convert those over to photographs. But I probably took 1,000 pictures while I was over there, as did a lot of my friends. And then memorabilia, no, not an awful lot. I brought home some Vietnamese money and some of the military script that we used to use, because you couldn't have.
Hold on a second.
Burned up that side of the tape, huh?
We've got about 14 minutes left.
Thank you.
Uh-oh, malfunction.
Go.
Yeah, we were not allowed to have American dollars. We had to turn those in. There was a big black market in Vietnam for actual American money, so they paid us in what they called military script. But so I brought some of that back home with me. I guess a number of other things, that I had, that nothing of real significance. I mean, I didn't bring home any weapons or grenades or that type of thing. As much as I wanted to, I didn't, so I thought better of it. So I wanted to make sure that bird got us back home. I didn't want my grenade going off in the hold baggage. So but I've got a few trinkets around. It's mostly money, and of course a lot of the cards that we carried, my driver's license, and meal cards and different things that you had to have on you at all times. Obviously you brought your uniform home, your dog tags, and that type of thing. So.
Does it still fit?
No. I took it out. I could maybe almost get the jacket buttoned if I didn't breathe. I looked at the slacks and I said, "There's not a chance." They'd probably go around one thigh now. So.
After you got home, how did you feel about the war news and newsreels and what you heard on the radio?
I think maybe by that time things were starting to settle in. That, and I think even while I was over there, you began to question some of the reports that we heard. Like, I know the bombers up north would go up and just dump hundreds of tons of bombs. And I remember the statement they used to make all the time was that heavy smoke or clouds didn't allow good bomb damage assessment. Well, I mean, how many times can you hear that before you figure somebody is not telling you the truth? Obviously, after I got home, things began to be a lot more came out. But even at that time, I guess I still feel that my feeling was that I went over there to do the right thing, and I believe that we did. And I probably didn't look at things quite as critically as what I do now 40 years later, when you find out that Westmoreland and McNamara and all those guys were lying through their teeth about the war effort the whole time. And it's disheartening, and it's one of the things that we try to really focus on today with the young fellows that are over in Iraq and Afghanistan, to make sure that they don't get the same dumbing down and bad treatment that we got when we came home from Vietnam.
when we celebrate, you know, the Labor Day, Memorial Day, and any other wartime activities, how do you feel? Do you feel a good part of that, or do you stay away from it?
Oh, no, no, I'm very active. I belong to the local VVA chapter here in Mount Clemens, and we're probably one of the more active chapters around. I was on the board of directors. I'm now second vice president. I serve on we have an honor guard where we go out and we do veteran funerals, and we do a lot of civic things with the various communities around the Detroit area, parades. I think there has certainly been a change of, you know, a change of feeling by the American people toward, in particular, the Vietnam vets, that they realize we got shortchanged, and they really go out of their way, I think, now to try to make us feel like our efforts were, you know, were appreciated. And can you say, you know, too little, too late? I know a lot of guys feel that way. I don't think that I do, and to me, it's still very moving when we're in a parade and, you know, marching down through Romeo as an example, and the people are out there, you know, thanking us for our efforts. It means a lot. It took a long time to get there, but I mean, I guess it's better late than never.
Are there any other experiences or remembrances you'd like to share with us?
Wow, it's kind of a pretty broad question there. I'm sure if I, you know, thought back a lot about it, there's probably a ton of things that happened that were just so commonplace in those days that they just don't even really register with me right now. So,
Do you think much about the time you spent in Vietnam now?
well, I think I do, because I'm involved in the VVA chapter, and of course, you know, a lot of we all have a very common bond. But I look back at it. I actually look back at it fondly. I mean, if I'd have come home minus an arm or a leg, would I have a different opinion of the war? Probably. I came back, I would have to say, you know, relatively whole, and hopefully still got all my sanity. I don't suffer from PTSD, and so I think there's a lot of guys that are still hurting from the war, you know, and I think in a lot of cases it helps them to be able to talk about it with somebody who was there and share the experience. But I don't regret it. I look back and I think when I saw how people in other parts of the world are forced to live, you begin to realize how good we have it here in the United States of America. People don't necessarily, if you haven't seen the other side, you maybe can't appreciate it. But I would sooner go 10,000 miles away and fight a war on somebody else's soil than to have to ever be faced with doing it here in our country.
Well, thank you for sharing your military experience with us. Appreciate it very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, we're recording.
You want me to narrate what these are?
Sure.
I was sent down the coast one time on a temporary duty mission. This happened to be on the ship that we were going down the South China Sea on, but it's not advancing. Am I hitting the right key here? Oh, there's one. Obviously, this must have been Christmas time in our barracks, because I get Christmas cards stuck all over my locker.
That's the hooch.
This is the second company now that I was in, the 617th. This was my bunk up here on the top, and there was a guy down below me, and this was my locker. His, I think, was on the other side. But all these window screens you see here along the, were all when that ammo dump blew up at Long Bend. We were probably close to a mile from the ammo dump, and it totally blew out all of our windows. Just the concussion of it was like when you saw the atomic bomb drop on Hiroshima. That's what it reminded me of. You saw a big mushroom cloud come up before you ever heard the impact or the explosion. It was kind of an interesting time. That's just some of the countryside there, looking through some of the roads that we had to traverse down. And you can see the jungle on both sides of the road, and you're always subject to being ambushed. That's another vehicle up there. You can hardly even see it there in the...
What kind of animals were around there that you needed to be concerned about?
Well, I never really saw too much in the way of animals around. I mean, water buffalo were what the Vietnamese used to farm their rice paddies. But the jungles themselves were full of snakes and scorpions. We had scorpions a lot. In some areas of South Vietnam there were tigers as well. But I never saw anything like that. Just a picture of me alongside my truck as a youngster. I was 22 years old. Company mascot. The monkey'd sit on your shoulder and he'd pick through your hair looking for lice, you know, like they do on themselves. And boy, when they look for lice, it hurts too. They pull the hell out of your hair. It was not pleasant. Plus he was kind of nasty anyway. You can see all the area here, all the red clay mud that we lived in, and with rain and that stuff, you have 4 pounds of mud on your boots. I think I was eating lunch there. Looks like I'm nibbling sea rations, and there's my canteen cup up there on the truck. So probably taking a lunch break. This picture here, I'm sitting in a guard bunker with a 50 caliber machine gun. And, they were doing a collage for our veterans chapter. They wanted a picture of us when we were in Vietnam, what we looked like back in those days. So I printed this off and I had it laying on my counter at my house. And my daughter come walking by and she looked down at the countertop and she says, "Who's the picture of the hunk of, Dad?" And I says, "That's me." She comes back over and she looks down and she says, "Get out of here. It's not you." I says, "Yeah, I was young once." Just picture wherever. Brown hair in those days. It's back on that ship again. So they used to come in and burn the brush back away from the roads because the Viet Cong would come up and set up mines along the side of the road, or just lay there and wait to ambush you. So they used to come through and burn all the shrubbery back away from the road for a distance, so chances of ambush were less. Going somewhere, I got a machine gun in my hand there and a flak vest, and probably taking our platoon lieutenant somewhere for a ride. That's the kind of ship that we landed on when we got to Vietnam. But this here was on the South China Sea where we were driving. We went down there by ship and took these LCUs and took some equipment down there with us. But that was the kind of thing I landed on where I thought they were going to be killing us when we came off it. One of our casualties. Jeep that rolled over. Me in the foxhole. Sitting on a tank somewhere. Shovel and rock, did a lot of that. I think we saw these before, so. Oh, there's helicopters coming in to land. You can see that all the red clay soil. We didn't move anywhere by the helicopters ourselves. We were basically in trucks. I was building one of the panel bridges. A lot of manual labor. Yeah, the rest of them you saw. So.